Imagine for a moment a quiet pond. The water is still, calm, and reflective. Then a small stone is tossed and ripples radiate outward, touching every part of the surface. Yet the stone itself does not cling to the water. It simply exists in its moment of action. In relationships, we often find ourselves as the stone, casting ripples of attention and affection, but we anxiously look back, waiting to see if the ripples are returned. This waiting, this yearning creates a kind of turbulence that disturbs the natural flow of connection. Now consider this: what if you stopped waiting for the ripples to come back? What if you allowed the water to remain still? Not as an act of neglect, nor out of resentment, but as a gentle surrender to the way things are. When someone does not call or text first, it is not a statement about your worth or your place in their life. It is merely a reflection of their flow, their rhythm. And it is not your task to chase after their rhythm, to pull it in line with yours. Think of the wind that moves through the trees. It does not demand that the leaves respond in a certain way. Some leaves will flutter and dance, others will remain still. If it is need, the wind does not question itself because of this. Observe it. It simply moves through you without clinging to it, and unhindered. There is nothing to say. Let go of the expectation you are not rich as must flow endlessly into the ocean of another's attention. To live in this way is not to retreat or to withdraw yourself, but when you release this attachment, you allow others the freedom to come to you, not out of your presence. They will find their way to you, just as the tide returns to the shore. And in that moment, the connection becomes real, unforced, and profound. And if they do not, it is simply life whispering that their path does not entwine with yours at this time. So let go. Do not wait for the call or the text. Trust the quietness, and in that stillness, you may just find the voice of life speaking back to you in ways far richer than you ever imagined. When we look at the relationships in our lives, we often fall into the trap of measuring their value based on the things we are given in return. A call, a text, a gesture of attention, these become our yardsticks for measuring the depth of another's affection, their interest, their care. But there is a subtle irony at play here in expecting the very things that we think will validate us. We inadvertently place ourselves in a position of dependence. We make our sense of worth conditional upon something external to us. We forget that we are the ones who create the meaning in our own lives. We forget that we are not helpless in the face of another's indifference. We are free to be who we are, regardless of whether or not someone reaches out to us. Think about a tree. A tree does not call out to the wind, asking for its touch. It simply stands there, rooted in its own space, offering shade, shelter, and beauty. The tree does not require the wind to prove its worthiness. The wind, in turn, comes and goes as it pleases, but it does not disturb the tree's essence. The tree knows its value is not tied to the wind. The tree knows that it exists independently of what others bring or do not bring to it. We too are like the tree. We are rooted in our own existence, and while we may receive affection, attention, or love from others, we must never let our worth be defined by these external forces. If we constantly chase after the gestures of others, if we keep looking to see if they will reach out first, we risk losing touch with the very source of our being. In those moments of waiting, we become like a leaf caught in the wind, blown about at the mercy of forces outside of ourselves. And so it is essential to ask, what if we stopped waiting for others to reach out? What if we stopped measuring our own worth by the actions of those around us? What if we simply let go of the idea that others should validate us and instead allowed ourselves to stand in the fullness of who we are? When we cease to wait, we cease to be trapped in that cycle of expectation. This is not to say that we should abandon all relationships. Imagine the sky, or that we should become emotionally distant or withdrawn. The clouds float across it, from it, and the stars twinkle far away. Relationships are vital to our experience. Yet the sky itself does not demand their presence. The point is this: we do not need the constant affirmation of others to feel independent of the clouds. We do not need others to call or text first to remind us of our value. The sky simply is. In fact, by surrendering the need for validation, It
we
does not
open
need the
ourselves
clouds
to
to announce
experiencing
it.
the beauty of
It is not
relationships
diminished when
in
the
a way
clouds
that
are
is
absent,
unencumbered
and it is
by
not
expectation.
defined by the fleeting nature of the clouds themselves. The sky is eternal. It exists beyond the need for external validation. So too must we learn to live beyond the need for validation from others. When
This
we
shift
release
in
the
perspective
expectation
is
that others
profound.
should reach out
It
to us
allows
first,
us to stop
we reclaim
performing
our
for
sense
others,
of
stop
peace.
shaping our actions to meet
We
their
reconnect with
unspoken
the silence
demands.
within us.
We seek
A
to act
silence
out of
that is not
obligation,
empty, but
out
full
of
of the
the
belief that we
possibility
must
of
do
being.
something to earn love,
We are no
friendship,
longer living
or
in
connection.
reaction to the world,
Instead,
constantly
we
waiting
act
for the
from
next
a
ripple
place
of
of
attention to come
generosity,
our way.
from a place of
Instead,
genuine
we are
affection,
simply being,
without
and
needing
in
to
that
monitor
being, we
or
find
measure
a
the
deep
response
sense of
we receive.
contentment.
In this way, relationships become more authentic, more nourishing, because they are not based on the desire for reciprocal action, but on the sharing of energy between two individuals who are already whole. There is a freedom that comes with this understanding, a freedom that allows us to engage with others from a place of abundance rather than scarcity. When we are not afraid of rejection, when we no longer fear the silence that may follow a call or text left unanswered, we open ourselves to a deeper kind of connection. This connection is not one that is dependent on time, on words, or on actions, but rather one that flows from the shared presence between us and others. It is an unspoken bond that exists beyond the limitations of our expectations. When we are no longer concerned with who reaches out first, we are free to be present with others in a way that is rooted in the moment. We no longer approach relationships with the mindset of a beggar, hoping that someone will throw us a scrap of attention. Instead, we approach relationships with the generosity of someone who has everything they need, someone who is offering their energy freely without expectation. This, in turn, creates a space for others to give freely as well, not because they are compelled to, but because they are moved to do so. And this brings us to the essence of human connection. It is not about getting something from others, but about sharing the fullness of who we are. In the end, the art of living is not about clinging to the expectations of others. We will attract relationships that are built on mutual respect, to stand firm in our own sense of worth, and to give from the fullness of who we are by the need for constant attention. When we stop waiting for others to call, these are the relationships that thrive in the space of freedom, where both individuals are free to be themselves without fear of measuring or expectation by the actions of others, and we begin to measure ourselves by the depth of our own presence in the world. This presence is not a passive state. It is an active, vibrant energy that flows through everything we do. It is not limited by the ebb and flow of external circumstances, nor is it diminished by the actions or inactions of others. It is a deep, steady current that runs through all of life. And when we tap into it, we find that we are never truly alone, even in the absence of others. By releasing the need for others to reach out first, we become free to be the fullest expression of ourselves. We become the stone that creates ripples without caring whether or not the ripples return to us. We become the wind moving through the trees, offering our presence without demanding anything in return. We become the sky, vast and infinite, holding space for all that is, without needing anything to validate our existence. And in this freedom, we find a deep peace that comes from knowing that we are enough. We do not need the attention of others to feel complete. We do not need the validation of others to know our worth. We simply need to remember that we are whole, just as we are. And when we live from this place of wholeness, the relationships which we form are no longer based on the exchange of validation, but on the sharing of our authentic selves with others, freely and without reservation. This is the gift of living beyond expectation. It is a life free from the need to chase after the approval of others. It is a life in which we are fully present in the moment, fully engaged in our own experience, and fully connected to the world around us. It is a life in which we are not defined by the actions of others, but by the depth of our own being, which remains constant regardless of whether or not someone calls or texts first. There is a profound shift
Consider
that
the
occurs when we
metaphor
stop
of a bird
expecting
in
others
flight.
to validate our worth.
A bird does
When
not
we
look
stop
to the
defining
ground to check
ourselves
if
by
it is
whether or not
soaring at the
someone
right
reaches
height.
out first. It does not
It is a
wait
shift
for
from
an audience
dependence
to
to
approve of
independence,
its flight.
from waiting to being fully
The bird
present.
simply flies, trusting
But
its
this
wings,
shift is not
trusting
simply
the
a
currents
mental
of the
decision.
wind,
It is a
trusting
deep
the motion of its
existential
body through
change
the
in
air.
how we relate to
It
ourselves
is in this
and to the
freedom,
world.
in the
It is the
nonchalance of its
realization
flight,
that we are not
that
here
its beauty
to be
lies.
constantly mirrored by the
It is
attention of
not
others.
beholden to anyone. We are here
Its
to live
flight
fully,
is an expression of its
to
own
engage
being,
with the world from a
not
place
a
of
response
inner
to the
strength and
desires of
integrity.
another.
If
Not
a bird
from the
were to wait for
fragility that
someone on the
arises
ground
when
to
we are
look
waiting
up
for
and give it
external
permission to
signals
fly,
to affirm
it would
our
never
place.
leave the earth. Its wings would remain folded, its energy constrained by the weight of doubt. In many ways, we are like the bird. We can choose to remain grounded, always waiting for someone to acknowledge us before we allow ourselves to fly. Or we can choose to spread our wings, to live in the fullness of who we are without waiting for someone's approval. To live in such a way is to live in alignment with our true nature. It is to live freely without the constant pressure of wondering if we are worthy enough for someone to notice us, without the need for others to validate our existence through their actions. It is not about isolation or detachment, but about coming into a state of balance, where our sense of worth is not tied to others. There is also a sense of liberation that comes when we release the need for external validation. When we stop waiting for others to call, text, or reach out, we cease being bound by the rhythms of their actions. We become free to create our own rhythms, to live our lives as we see fit, unencumbered by the expectations and desires of others. The more we relinquish this attachment to the actions of others, the more we can embrace our own creative power. We begin to see that our lives are not defined by the responses we receive from others, but by the way we choose to show up in the world. This freedom is not a rejection of love or connection. It is a recognition that love does not need to be coerced or forced. True love, true affection flows naturally when there is space for it to arise. When we stop trying to force others to show us they care, when we stop measuring their care by the actions they take, we open the door to a more organic, effortless flow of affection. We stop trying to hold on to relationships that feel like they require constant effort to sustain. Instead, we allow relationships to evolve as they will, without anxiety, without worry. We trust that if a relationship is meant to be, it will find its own way to flourish regardless of who reaches out first. This dynamic also shifts the way we experience ourselves. The more we let go of the need to be constantly affirmed by others, the more we come to understand the truth of our own being. We come to realize that our worth is not determined by external forces, but by our ability to stand in our own truth, to be who we truly are without apology. We are not dependent on the approval of others, because we know that our own validation is enough. We are enough as we are. And no amount of calls, texts, or gestures can add to or diminish that. Our essence is complete, and it is this essence that we offer to the world, not as a demand for recognition, but as a gift to those who are open to receiving it. It is when we let go of this need for constant affirmation that we begin to feel the depth of the connections we already have. Without the constant need to monitor the actions of others, we begin to experience the subtle beauty of relationships that are rooted in genuine understanding and mutual respect. These relationships do not require constant communication or checking in to be real. They simply are, existing in the space between two individuals who know that their connection is not based on anything external, but on the shared recognition of each other's humanity. There is a quiet grace in relationships that are not defined by the constant need to measure and analyze. These relationships do not have to be marked by every phone call, every text, every moment of attention. They are marked instead by a mutual understanding that the connection is not fragile, that it will not disappear because of a missed call or a delay in response. It is a deep and steady understanding that transcends the fleeting nature of daily exchanges, rooted in something much more enduring. When we stop waiting for others to reach out first, we also begin to understand the importance of our own actions. We are no longer bound by the need for others to take the first step. We can reach out when we feel moved to, not out of obligation, but because we want to. This shift allows us to act with true intention, to give from a place of abundance rather than scarcity. We do not act because we need something in return, but because we are already whole, and we simply want to share that wholeness with others. This, in turn, allows us to show up in the world with greater presence and authenticity. When we start measuring our self-worth by the actions of others, we begin to show up in relationships not as someone trying to win affection, but as someone offering love and connection freely without strings attached. We are no longer seeking validation, we are simply offering ourselves, knowing that whatever is meant to be will come back to us naturally. There is a deep sense of peace that arises when we release the need for others to affirm our worth. It is a peace that comes from knowing that we are enough, just as we are. We do not need to chase after someone's attention, nor do we need to measure the value of our relationships by how often we are contacted. We are free to simply be, to live in the fullness of our own presence, and to trust that the connections we need will arise naturally, without force, without anxiety. In the end, it is not the calls or the texts that define our relationships. It is the space between them, the unspoken understanding that exists when two people are truly present with each other. It is the silence that fills the moments when no words are exchanged, but both people feel the connection nonetheless. When we stop waiting for others to reach out first, we stop being defined by their actions. We become whole in ourselves. And it is from this wholeness that we form relationships that are deep, meaningful, and unburdened by the need for constant validation. To live in this way is to live in harmony with the natural rhythms of life. It is to let go of the need to control, to manipulate, or to demand. It is to trust that just as the ocean's waves come and go, so too will relationships ebb and flow, and that ultimately we are always connected to the vastness of life itself, regardless of who calls or texts first. And in that understanding, we find a peace that is far greater than any external affirmation could ever provide. To live without the constant need for others to validate our existence is to step into a deeper understanding of the self. The constant checking of phones, the anxiety of waiting for a call or text, the measuring of our value based on someone else's response, all of these distractions take us away from the present moment. They pull us out of our own inner world and place us in a state of waiting, of expectation, where our worth is contingent on something outside of us. But in this space of waiting, we miss the beauty of what is already here. We miss the experience of life as it is, and we forget that the greatest source of validation comes from within. Consider the flow of a river. A river does not hesitate, nor does it question its own path. It moves forward, carving its way through the land, its waters ever changing, yet ever present. It does not stop to ask if the earth approves of its course, nor does it wait for the mountains to call it to them. The river simply flows, unimpeded by doubt or hesitation. It trusts that its journey is exactly as it should be. Similarly, when we stop looking outward for approval and affirmation, we begin to flow with life in a way that is not dictated by the external world, but by our own inner currents. When we wait for others to call or text first, we place ourselves in a position of subjugation. We put our sense of worth in the hands of others, and we become like vessels waiting to be filled by something that is not guaranteed. The irony is that in seeking approval, we are often unknowingly rejecting ourselves. We are saying to ourselves that we are not enough as we are, that we need someone else's acknowledgement to feel whole. This state of perpetual waiting creates a sense of lack within us. We become restless, looking for something to fill that empty space. Yet all the while, the very thing we seek is already within us. To let go of the need for others to initiate contact is to reclaim our autonomy. It is to stand on our own 2 feet, secure in our own self-worth, and to realize that our value is not determined by whether or not someone reaches out to us. This is not a statement of arrogance or self-sufficiency that rejects connection. Rather, it is a recognition that our connection to others does not diminish our own sense of completeness. We are not empty vessels waiting to be filled, but rather full in our own right. It is only from this place of fullness that we can truly give to others without expecting anything in return. If we look closely, we begin to see how the search for validation often leads us away from the very things we truly desire. We seek love and affection, yes, but in seeking it through the actions of others, we inadvertently put ourselves in a position of needing approval. We make our love conditional. We tie our sense of connection to the actions and gestures of others, believing that they are the only sources of our worth. But when we free ourselves from this expectation, we open up space for a more authentic kind of love, one that is not contingent on the ebb and flow of someone else's attention. When we begin to recognize that our worth does not depend on the actions of others, we stop waiting. We stop living in the space of anticipation, where every message, every call, every missed interaction carries with it the weight of judgment. Instead, we become present to life itself. We begin to live in the now, no longer looking to the future for approval or affirmation, but experiencing the richness of each moment as it comes. In this space, we find that life itself becomes our validation. The very act of being present in the world, of being fully ourselves, is enough. This shift is not an overnight process. It requires patience and deep self-reflection. It requires that we recognize the ways in which we have allowed ourselves to be defined by the actions of others, and that we take responsibility for our own sense of worth. But with time, this shift becomes easier. We begin to notice the moments when we feel the urge to check our phones, the moments when we feel a sense of inadequacy because someone has not reached out. And in those moments, we have a choice. We can choose to give in to the pull of neediness, or we can choose to remind ourselves that our worth is not defined by these external signals. We can choose to ground ourselves in the understanding that we are already whole, already enough. When we no longer wait for others to validate us, we free ourselves from the cycle of seeking approval. We stop playing the game of measuring our worth by how others treat us. Instead, we begin to recognize the inherent value in simply being. There is a profound freedom in this realization. We no longer have to chase after the fleeting moments of attention that come from others. We can live freely with an open heart and heart, knowing that the love and connection we seek is already within us. This does not mean that we become emotionally distant or indifferent to others. On the contrary, when we are no more reliant on others to validate our worth, we become more capable of giving love without expectation. We are no longer afraid of rejection because we know that we are enough as we are. Our relationships become more genuine because they are not rooted in the need for constant affirmation. Instead, they are grounded in a mutual appreciation for one another, free from the expectations and pressures that often come with the need for external validation. In this space of freedom, we begin to cultivate a deeper sense of peace. We are no longer caught in the web of waiting, of constantly checking our phones to see if we are being noticed. We are free to live fully in the present, to experience the world without the weight of anticipation. The pressure to prove ourselves fades away, and in its place, we find a deep sense of contentment. We begin to understand that our worth is not something to be earned, but something that is intrinsic to our being. This peace is not something that can be found outside of us. It is not dependent on others reaching out to us first or on any particular interaction. It is something that arises when we are able to fully accept ourselves as we are. It is a peace that comes from knowing that we do not need anyone else's approval to be valid, to be worthy, to be loved. And when we live from this place of peace, we invite others to do the same. We create a space where relationships can flourish naturally, where love can grow without the constraints of expectation. Living without the constant need for others to initiate contact allows us to engage with life in a more authentic and profound way. We are no longer distracted by the noise of waiting and measuring. We are free to experience the richness of each moment, the depth of each interaction, without the pressure of needing something from others. We are simply present, and in that presence we find that life becomes fuller, more meaningful, and more connected. When we release the need for others to reach out to us first, we stop living in reaction. We stop being defined by how others treat us. We become the creators of our own experience, the authors of our own story. We write the narrative of our lives not based on the actions of others, but on the choices we make, the way we show up in the world. We no longer wait for permission to be ourselves. We simply are, and in that being, we find a peace that is unshakable, a love that is boundless, and a freedom that is absolute. This way of living is not about detachment or isolation. It is not about rejecting the world or shutting ourselves off from others. It is about embracing the world fully, without the need for constant validation. It is about standing firm in our own truth, knowing that we are enough just as we are, and offering that truth to the world freely, without expectation. When we live this way, we open ourselves to the deepest and most fulfilling relationships, ones that are grounded in mutual respect, love, and acceptance. The question is not about whether or not someone calls or texts first. The question is about how we show up in the world. Are we living in a state of constant anticipation, always waiting for the next sign that we are worthy? Or are we living fully in the present, embracing our own worth and offering it freely to the world? The choice is ours. And in choosing to live from a place of abundance, we free ourselves from the endless cycle of waiting. We reclaim our power, and in doing so, we create the space for deep, authentic connections that are not based on need, but on the simple beauty of being present with each other, just as we are. In the end, the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the freedom to live without constantly seeking validation from others. When we start waiting for someone else to call or text first, we begin to understand that our worth is not defined by anyone's actions, but by the fullness of who we are. It is in releasing the need for external affirmation that we reclaim our power, our peace, and our ability to create meaningful connections that are rooted in mutual respect and love. When we live from a place of self-acceptance, we invite the world to meet us with authenticity, without expectation or demand. So let go of the need to be constantly reassured. Stand in the knowledge that you are enough just as you are. And from that place of inner strength, watch how life begins to unfold, not through the lens of waiting, but through the freedom of simply being.